Hello, thank you for joining us. You're listening to an ISE podcast. ISE equals ICT Solutions and Education.
Hello, I'm Janice Oliva, president of ISE Magazine, with a Frontiers First special edition podcast brought to you by ISE and EXFO and Frontier. EXFO pioneers smarter network tests, monitoring, and analytic solutions for the world's leading CSPs, NEMs, and web-scale companies, where good enough testing and analytics just isn't good enough anymore. So today, our guests are Michael Golub, Senior Vice President, Capital Management and CAS, and Eric Honig, Director, Access and Platform Ecosystem Business Units with EXFO. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Great. So before we get started, I would like to just ask our listeners to click the link on the email that you received, saying ISE, go subscribe in the email promotion about the podcast, to subscribe to future ISE podcasts, and to receive a free subscription to ISE Magazine. So moving on, today we're going to discuss a couple of topics related to transforming the network, copper to fiber. So first, Eric, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you. With your experience in the industry and the ever-growing need for bandwidth, what are some challenges that are faced by service providers today?
Well, what we see as the ultimate challenge is really to deploy high-speed broadband services with a very rapid time to market, but obviously with the highest possible return on investment. So from an access network perspective, there's the obvious choice of deploying fiber all the way to the home, so FTTH in other words, or enhancing existing infrastructure with a combination of fiber and copper loop plan. So fiber to the home, FTTH, is really seen as the ultimate end goal for many global service providers. But, of course, it's the deployment costs and times that are key factors to consider with fiber deployment.
Thank you. I'd have to agree with you on those. And, you know, cost is of an important issue to all service providers. So with that, can you describe some of the new technologies and business drivers around those initiatives?
Sure, absolutely, Janice. I'll start with the copper-based technologies, and obviously where there's existing copper infrastructure in place, this is where it makes sense to look at some of the available copper-based technologies. There's two that I want to touch on in particular. The first is VDSL2 vectoring, and from a business driver standpoint, what we see is that it's really all about time to market. So with VDSL2 vectoring, what we've seen is many global service providers can actually deliver higher speeds over the existing copper infrastructure at about a third of the cost of deploying fiber, and perhaps more importantly, that deployment is done in a fraction of the time. So vectoring technology is really all about noise cancellation. It was introduced to mitigate reduction of VDSL data rates, which is typically caused by far-end crosstalk effects. And what we see typically is subscriber data rates in the range of 100 meg. Looking at the architecture, VDSL2 and vectoring, it's leveraging what's known as a fiber to the node or FTTN-based infrastructure, which is where the optical fiber is fed into a remote DSLAM, and that DSLAM is typically within 3,000 feet or less of the customer prem. So the second technology I wanted to mention was GFAST. GFAST, it's actually a fairly new DSL technology, and what we see here as the key business driver, really it's about reduction of CapEx by deferring the cost of extending the fiber into every home and building. So effectively, GFAST is providing fiber-like speeds over that very last distance of copper infrastructure. In terms of data rates, what we see with GFAST is aggregate data rates up to 1 gigabit per second. And of course, that depends on the loop length and the configuration. What we would typically see in terms of real deployments, and anywhere in the range of 100 to 500 meg typical subscriber rates. Architecture-wise for GFAST, again, it's pushing that fiber even deeper into the network. So it leverages an infrastructure called FTTDP, fiber to the distribution point. And basically the fiber is getting pushed to what's called a distribution point unit, a DPU, which is typically 1,000 feet or less within the customer prem. Next, I want to move on to fiber-based technology. So, of course, obviously it makes sense to deploy fiber in a greenfield area, but also in strategic areas where, that deployment cost can be justified with higher service revenues. So looking at fiber to the home, from a business driver standpoint, it's really all about maximizing ARPU, so that average revenue per user. And obviously with the increased data rates we're realizing from an FTTH deployment, it enables the ability to offer premium services, and obviously those services are enhancing end-user experience and ultimately enabling the operator to build a competitive advantage. So obviously fiber to the home completely bypasses the copper infrastructure, and depending on the network topology and the bandwidth requirements, there's actually several technologies available. What we see being most commonly deployed in the telco space is the GPON technology. So in all cases I mentioned, there's an element of new deployments, whether that's fiber deeper into the network or it's a combination of new DSL technologies being utilized. As such, it's absolutely vital to establish best testing practices at each deployment phase to ensure we're minimizing costly troubleshooting efforts into the future.
Wonderful. So you mentioned the importance of best testing practices when deploying these types of networks. Can you name a few of those?
Sure, absolutely. For this, I'll start with the optical distribution network. So really the key point from an optical network standpoint is performing testing at every deployment phase to make sure that new optical component that's being installed is installed correctly. There's a variety of tests that come into play here, and they range from connector end face inspection to optical power measurements to more advanced qualification and characterization testing, which can be realized through OTDR testing as an example. One of the most important factors in ensuring a proper transmission over fiber is controlling the power loss in the network against the link loss budget specs, which is ultimately coming from the network design recommendation. One key point that I wanted to make sure I mentioned as well, dirty connectors, what we see is dirty connectors actually remain the #1 cause of faulty fiber connections. So with that said, fiber inspection and cleaning we see as an absolute must. Switching over to the copper network now, that twisted pair copper network, again, it's a very similar methodology. There's an element of physical layer measurements that need to be done. There's a variety of them, the key ones being things like stress balance, resistive fault location, TDR type testing, and all of these measurements are ultimately used to detect and locate copper faults during installation and repair phases. Once we validate the physical layer on the copper network, then the next best practice would be around performing sync tests, so a GFAST or a VDSL2 sync test. And really this is being done just to validate that the actual subscriber rates are being met and ultimately the performance is there. And then thirdly, the next step beyond that would really be to look at the service layer or the IP layer validation, and whether that's IP video or VoIP. One key thing I wanted to mention here is the importance to validate the real throughput of a circuit using test solutions that have some sort of an embedded speed test methodology. And an example of that would be to have an embedded UCLA speed test. UCLA is a speed test methodology that many subscribers, end-user subscribers, would be quite familiar with. And the last data point, Janice, I wanted to mention, really all around end-to-end field test process automation. So regardless whether it's a fiber network or a copper network or a combination of both, what we see is it's absolutely critical to streamline and automate the complex testing procedures during both construction and service turn-up phases. And the best way to do this is really to leverage a cloud-based process automation solution. And really it all boils down to ensuring compliance. So having the ability to centrally define the methods of procedures and automatically distribute those procedures down to a test equipment fleet, and then enforcing compliance amongst the workforce in terms of conducting the right tests with the right thresholds in the right sequence, basically automating the overall test process. But it's not just the test process, it's also ensuring that the test data is captured and automatically sent northbound. And in doing this, what we see is that it ultimately ensures deployment efficiency. So again, guiding the field techs through that testing process. And what we've seen is that it could actually reduce the overall testing time by up to 50%. The other point is really around network quality, so improving network quality. Obviously, if you're forcing in compliance and you're accepting test data that's only a pass, as an example, then this is ultimately helping to ensure 100% first-time right builds, which ultimately leads to that truck roll reduction. And the last data point I wanted to capture here is it's really about ensuring data integrity, but also having visibility to the data. So gaining visibility to the test data is one element of that, but it's what you do with the test data. So having the ability to visualize and dashboard, benchmark performance, things like network quality, job progress, contractor efficiency, and so on is absolutely critical.
Agreed, that the ability to see that data and that helps also with, making sure that it's accurate when somebody can take a look at it and have access to it. So that's great information. Thanks for sharing those items, Eric. And for the industry overview. Now with that, we're going to be going to Michael for the Frontier perspective. So Michael, I'm going to ask you that same first opening question, if you don't mind, with the bandwidth needs of your clientele. What are some of the challenges that are being faced by not only you, but maybe other service providers?
Yeah, thank you, Janice. I think there are three major areas I'd like to address in answering that question. First, manage the exponential growth of video on our network that's driven by Netflix and the other OTT, video providers that have recently come to market. We find in many cases as we open up additional capacity, especially in rural areas, so we see this capacity quickly consumed by our customers. It's difficult to make a adequate return on capital investment at the price point for the services remain relatively flat, while the appetite for the services increasing every day we see on our network. So hopefully the FCC will address this issue as part of the network and neutrality reform that's currently under consideration. The second major issue or challenge that we face is really permitting. And as you know, our primary method to expand broadband or increasing our speeds throughout our network is basically a loop shortening exercise, especially in our rural markets, shortening that last mile to increase speeds for our customers. We continually run into permitting issues, whether it's city, county, state, federal permits, Bureau of Land Management, the Department of Transportation. There are numerous issues in working with that. And in some cases, we've had to wait on permits for more than a year in order to move forward with the expanding broadband services and bringing broadband to rural America. While you would think that these same agencies would have a vested interest in helping us achieve that, we find that's not always the case. In addition to that, we need power at these remote sites, and so we have to work with the power companies to get these sites energized. And obviously, they have competing needs also, especially during the summer months when there's storms and things like that they are pulled away from providing, I would say, more routine type of activity in getting customers back in service. So those are two of the issues. And finally, I'd say the third issue is skilled resources, especially for copper splicing and grooming of a copper from our older DSLAMs to new VDSL-enabled DSLAMs. As our workforce matures and we deploy fiber deeper and deeper to the network, proven difficult to find qualified technicians to work in our copper on our copper network, especially in some of the more, remote rural areas.
Yes, I have heard that. And to speak on the loop shortening and the permit issues, I read an article not too long ago about the challenges that a provider had to go through with the permits and how long it took and all the hoops they had to jump through, and it was just horrendous. So I applaud that you guys can get anything done in this industry. It's just really disheartening how many barriers are put up. So anyway, my comments on that. But what are some new technologies that would be helpful in expanding the broadband services for Frontier?
Well, VDSL2 vectoring and GFAS that we just spoke about are very effective solutions, significantly increasing, to provide increased speeds. The use cases, however, are still limited by distance. In areas where you have, high density of homes, a fiber to the home solution is often the most practical solution. However, these solutions are not practical at this time in most of rural America. Even with public-private partnerships, fiber to the home in rural area is cost prohibitive. Costs ranging between, $2,000 to $5,000 per home passed, with a monthly fee of $30. The payback just isn't there to push that fiber that deep. And what we would love to have is really a technology that increases the range, so we have to put less electronics on that copper network. And if we could get speeds in even the 20 to 40 meg range, but much further out, would be very, very helpful for us. With the current video compression technologies, this would allow good video experience for those customers, even linear video. So increasing that capability to get, I would call medium range speeds out to the customers in rural America, that technology would be extremely helpful for Frontier. And the second thing, in many cases, the outside plant work to expand broadband accounts for 60 to 70% of the cost of deploying broadband. Therefore, technology advancements to reduce the cost of placing and splicing would have a very positive impact on our broadband builds, both reducing the cost and the time to deploy broadband assets.
That would be great. Eric, it sounds like EXFO could go into another area of specialty here, too, with that new technology. There's a lot of opportunity in this industry, that's for sure. As far as the CAF funding, I know that you've been a recipient, Michael, of FCC CAF funding, and by the way, congratulations for being ahead of schedule on that program. That's wonderful. But besides the obvious benefit of expanding broadband service, what are the other benefits you receive from the CAF builds?
Well, as you know, Frontier's participated in all the CAF programs, and we started in late 2011. Hard to believe it's been that long ago. We started this program. We've used the CAF program as one of our major building blocks of our network modernization effort, especially in our rural markets. We've combined our acquisition activities, state broadband grants where they've been available, and our CAF program to do the following kind of areas of network modernization. First, upgrading our old SONET transport technology, primarily between central offices location back to our major internet hubs, and we've now updated that with ROADM technology enhanced with packet optical networking. And this has really enabled not only the enhanced broadband services for the residential customers, but also Ethernet services in these rural markets to support businesses, schools, and community agencies in these markets. The second thing would be, replacing our old BRAS technology with next generation broadband network gateways. Once again, significantly increasing broadband capacity at these aggregation points in our routing network, providing new functionality and allowing, simplification of the network to a large degree. Third is the migration of our TDM voice platform to VoIP. Once again, allowing significant reduction in space, power, while enabling services, enhanced services to our customers. And finally, even upgrading our plant infrastructure, power, batteries, rectifiers, generators, all those things that we never talk too much about, but just have one fail and you'll see how important they really are to maintaining a good, stable network. So those are the areas that we've really, focused on modernizing as we move forward with the CAF program and using it kind of to leverage these other programs that we have.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that insight. All very, very useful to your team, I'm sure. So I appreciate your candor on those issues. So if you have any questions, please be sure to connect with Michael on your internal website. And Michael and Eric, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm sure our listeners appreciate your expertise and insight. I know I really did and learned quite a bit. You can also reach out directly to Eric at his email, which is his first and last name. So it's eric.honig@exfo.com, or you can just go to their website, exfo.com. So thanks again, everybody, for listening. And be sure to click on the isemag.com/subscribe link in the email you received about the podcast and to subscribe, as well as be notified of new episodes. And we will see you again next time on Frontiers First Special Edition Podcast. Thanks.